Running is hard, really hard. It's one of the things I love about the sport too. You have to work hard for every PB and finish medal. So you would think that for us runners, it would be a piece of cake to keep recovery runs easy and take a day off when our aching bodies need it. But no, I think we've all made these mistakes, and realistically, probably more than once too. This episode is meant as a reminder to not screw up the easy stuff, like recovery runs, eating before your workout, and resisting the urge to go on a 10-mile run when your calf is so tight you think it might burst. Alright, maybe the last one is a little specific, but I think you get the idea. Joining me today is the founder of Runners Connect, Coach Jeff Gaudette. He knows all the silly mistakes runners make through years of coaching, and even by making them himself as an athlete. There's a good chance you might listen to this entire episode and still turn your easy run into a tempo from time to time. I know I've been there, but at least you can put the work in to hear what you should be doing. So let's get to it. Coach Jeff, welcome back to another episode of Run to the Top.
Awesome. Excited to be here, Corey. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And, initially I'd reached out to you to do a podcast completely on recovery runs because it struck me that even as somebody who's been running for so long, it still feels like something that's so easy to screw up. But after chatting back and forth, it sounds like it's probably not the only thing that even veteran athletes can screw up that should be simple in theory.
Absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes it's the simple things that are easiest to screw up because we kind of get ahead of ourselves and focus on like all the complicated things, the new technology or the new training methods, and sometimes the simple stuff kind of evades us.
Is there anything looking back to when you were competing as an athlete that you would do that, you wish maybe you had done differently?
Pretty much everything. No, it's funny, definitely recovery ones would be one of the things. Like I definitely did those wrong for sure. There's a lot of stuff about training now that we know now that we just didn't know back then. Strength training being a big part of it, biomechanics being another huge part. Even a lot of the training methods these days that have just changed. So yeah, there was a lot that I would do differently for sure.
Yeah, and when you ran your marathon PR, I think low 220s, if I'm correct, was Strava a thing at the time? Were people worried about what pace they would be uploaded to social media?
Oh, no, absolutely not. There was no Strava. Garmin had just really come around in the sense that not even from a sharing perspective, just more from you could actually measure your route perspective. But I think at that time there were like 3 or 4 Garmin models, and only the most recent was really accurate at all. All of the other ones were pretty inaccurate. If any building or tree got in your way, it would stop tracking you. So that's pretty far back.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting because to me, a lot of people attribute that pressure to run quick to Strava and potentially worrying what people think, but I think it's a tendency that predates Strava. I think it's more just a runner's tendency to want to do everything to the max.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a thing like Strava makes it a little bit more it adds outside pressure, like you said. But I think really it comes from an internal thing. It takes a long time for runners to realize that running faster isn't always better. I know for me, it took until I was well out of college, so probably after running for 8 to 10 years before I realized that running faster just isn't always better. And even then, there's still when you train with a group, there's still this tendency to push yourself, even though okay, this pace isn't a recovery pace for me today, but this is what everybody else is doing, so I'm just going to do it. And so even sometimes when you and you're adhering to it most of the time, you can still fall off the track for sure.
Yep. Jeff, I'm going to cut it right there. Audio problems, I'll say on my end. I can see the fan I have in the corner is lighting me up, so let me just turn that off.
Sure.
There we go. Okay, I think that should be better. Perfect. Let me
Awesome.
just make a note of the timing on that, and then I'll keep going. Okay, perfect. And then I'll pick it back up. Yeah, I think those pressures, especially the internal ones, have been around for quite a while. Beyond the recovery runs, are there any other sort of simple running topics that you think that runners, especially the ones you coach, tend to get wrong a lot?
Yeah, so like I said, there's a ton. I mean, I've kind of mentioned these before, but strength training being a huge one in the sense that, back when I was running, it really was just there was no knowledge that strength training or the type of strength training that you could do would be beneficial. So like, I wouldn't really necessarily call that a mistake from historically, but nowadays it's definitely a mistake, because if you're listening to this podcast or you're reading anything about running, then you should pretty much know that there's a strength training is a huge component of being able to stay healthy, be able to run fast, being able to stay running longer from a health perspective. And so we make the mistake of with strength training either doing the same stuff over and over. So if you think about a lot of what people do with strength training, it's they do the same core routine 3 times a week, and they'll probably do that throughout their whole training cycle. They won't vary the reps or the sets or the time. They won't add any resistance or any way to make it more difficult. They just kind of do the same thing over and over. And then after the race, they may stop doing strength training for a couple weeks as they kind of recover. And then they go back to their next race and they just do the same core routine over and over and over and over again. And so if you think about that from like a running perspective, it'd be like if you just did the same workouts over and over and over. And then we're like, oh, I'm not really understanding why I'm not getting any stronger. So that's a big one with strength training. The other big one is just like, it's kind of a mistake, but in the sense of rationalizing why they don't have time to do it, and I'm somebody that, when I was running professionally, obviously I had all the time in the world. That was my job. I was dedicated to it. But nowadays I have four kids, obviously I own Runners Connect. And so like, I still make time for the strength training. And, basically what you need to do is start, as a trick is like, just start finding little ways to add it in. One, it doesn't need to take long, 10 to 15 minutes. I've talked about this a lot of times on the podcast. And second, it doesn't have to be like directly after your run. You can always find other times throughout the day to do it. So for me, it's always much easier to do in the evening. I can always find a half hour in the evening when, like my youngest likes to take his showers. He's only 5 years old. So he takes 10-minute, 15-minute showers. So he likes it. So he's playing with his toys in there. And that's when I'll do my strength work sometimes. And so, you just got to find little ways to get it in. And that's a big mistake on the strength training side. The other big one that comes to mind is when it comes to injuries is trying to run through things. And so we as runners, we start to feel something. And I totally understand the difficulty of deciding, okay, if what I feel like an injury, or that's something I need to treat and take care of, or is it just the normal, what I call like a niggle of training, where sometimes things are going to get sore, etc. And so, but that said, once runners realize that something is probably an injury, we're still pretty hesitant to take any time off, and we continue to try to push through it. And in my experience, what ends up happening is instead of needing to take 1 to 3 days off to kind of let something cool down, you end up pushing it, and then you end up needing 3 weeks off because you completely tore something or developed tendonitis or something like that. So that's a huge mistake I see people make, is just trying to run through injuries.
Yeah, I love that you called that one out, especially because just this morning I headed out for a run intending to do maybe 9-10 miles, and after 2 miles just turned back around, figured no, something doesn't feel right, and cross train, and definitely not something that I would have done maybe even a couple of years ago before I've had to deal with a few IT band and plantar fasciitis injuries.
Yeah, it takes a few times getting kicked in the butt and realizing like, every time I try to run through this, I end up on the shelf for 3 weeks. And then one time like you said, you have a great example of like turn around, do some cross training for a couple of days, let it rest, let it relax, and then realize, oh wow, I was able to get over that molehill a lot quicker, and I didn't have to take 2 to 3 weeks off.
Yeah, the other thing I found kind of a paradox is what you said about strength training. I think it's totally true. You wouldn't want to do the same workout over and over again, but when you look at it from a mileage perspective, you can see why runners might take that approach, because if you just gradually build more and more easy miles going at the exact same pace, you're probably still going to get more efficient up to a certain point, whereas, as you said, it probably doesn't work exactly the same way with strength training.
Yes and no. But you think about the thing with strength training. So yes, and actually I would say yes, because if you look at running, there's generally 3 variables that we control, right? So there's volume, distance, and then there's intensity, which is pace, and then there's like accumulated volume, so like total throughout the week, etc., that kind of thing. With strength training, it's kind of the same thing. So you have your intensity is really correlates to like sorry, the blanking on the word. When you Overload. So sorry, when you add resistance, something like that. So that kind of translates to intensity. And then you have reps and sets, which are kind of correlate to volume. So it's really the same thing. You kind of manipulate both of those. And like when you think about a running training, like you're always either pushing one of them, whether it be volume or pace, intensity, that kind of thing. So yeah, they're actually pretty similar.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, no, I never thought about it in that light, but it's true. I think strength training is definitely one a lot of runners, including myself, get wrong.
Yeah, and you know, and I don't blame us, you know, in the sense that like, again, I understand because you want to focus on the running, and then you know we read some, you know, we're so much in love with running, and strength training is kind of like, okay, I do it because I want to be a better runner. It's not because, for a lot of us, it's not because that's what we love to do. And so with running, we read about it, we listen to podcasts, we watch videos, and you don't necessarily do that with strength training. And so there's one of those things. It's like a knowledge gap. Like I totally understand where people fall into that trap of, okay, yeah, I'm doing my core work, I'm doing my hip strength training, etc., and not realizing that that's the first step, and then the next step is putting together something where it's progressive, that you're actually able to get stronger over time.
Yeah, very nice. I think the one other piece that I really wanted to make sure that we cover today, and hopefully we will get to, is nutrition. And obviously, there's a lot of good science you can do that's maybe not so simple. But I think at the most basic level, the idea of eat enough, get lots of carbs, even that I find it is challenging as a runner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'm always hesitant with nutrition because there's a lot of dogma when it comes to like what types of diet are, you know, the best. So sometimes you start getting into this topic and it's like people are like, oh no, you can't do that. But for me, I always look at it super simple. Like you said, the basics are pretty simple, and even that, I think some people will argue with you. Like when you said, you know, eat lots of carbs, I'm totally of the belief that you need a lot of carbohydrates to fuel yourself as a runner. There's a lot of science that supports that. I think even recently there's been some studies. It's something that I'm working on now for a new article, but even that, like you'll get a lot of pushback from athletes. And again, nutrition is just like training in the sense that there's no exact one right way, you know. And so as long as a lot of the principles are being followed, absolutely. But I do agree that nutrition can be a huge mistake, from a fueling perspective and then also a recovery perspective. Those are the two big things that I see runners doing incorrectly when it comes to like directly related to training.
Definitely, and I think the way I used to think about my fueling during runs is how much fuel do I need to take on to get through the run?
Mm-hmm.
And that works to a point, but I think I've kind of retrained myself understanding that if you take in more fuel, you do recover better, that it's not just about getting through it. It's more about optimization and what's going to be the best for my my training looking week to week or even month to month.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really a three-pronged. It's, you know, it's pre-workout, it's during intra-workout, and then post-workout. And to me, you know, my opinion, the two most important are pre-workout and post-workout. The intra, you know, there's a lot. It's pretty easy with the intra-workout stuff. You know, you pretty much just need simple carbs. But the pre-workout and post-workout are things that I think a lot of runners don't do correctly or don't think about in the right way. Maybe pre-workout, not so much, but definitely post-workout. There's, you know, your body is literally starving for nutrients when you finish a really hard workout, and especially when you combine the fact that you're doing these workouts and runs day after day after day after day. There's not a lot of time. You know, your body is trying to recover as fast as it can, and the easiest way for you to help your body do that is to give it the nutrients it needs: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, healthy vitamins, minerals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All right, so as we deep dive into topics more, why don't we start there on the nutrition piece if we're already talking about it? I've got
Sure.
some notes on the other topics we brought up I want to make sure we get to.
Absolutely.
Cool. So on nutrition, without getting into any specific dogma or diets, because I think those stuff, it's easy to dispute, just at the highest level, why do you think it is that so many runners, even if they know they should be making certain changes to their diet, don't do it? And I think to me the most obvious example is just getting enough fuel, but whatever your belief is, what that optimal fuel is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of it. I think a lot of it comes down to like logistics, in the sense that it can hard. It kind of gets back to that strength training thing where we talk about there's not enough time. You know, running as it is already takes up hours, 90 minutes a day. You know, depending on how much you're doing, but like it takes up a good chunk of your day. And then now you're talking about, okay, somebody says now you got to add strength training in, and you got to add injury prevention work and all that stuff. And then now there's the mental and preparation burden of getting your nutrition right. And so I think sometimes that can be a hindrance to properly fueling before, during, and after your workout, because it's just like there's so much mental energy going into the workout itself that sometimes there's just not enough mental energy to think about, okay, I gotta wake up and make sure that I have this and this and this before my run, and then during my run I need X, Y, and Z, and then after my run I need to make sure that I have this, that, and the other, and then all the other while you have, you get your work calling you all the time, on the, you get home, you get 15 emails that you're like, oh my God, and then the kids are misbehaving, and it's like, there's all these things. So it's like sometimes it can be the last thing that you end up thinking about. To me, that, at least from my perspective, that's been my experience as I've gotten older and moved into the competitive world, trying to, with a family and job and that kind of stuff, of realizing like sometimes it's like, oh my God, I can't unless I like meal plan like specifically, sometimes things just get dropped.
Yeah, totally. I think you've hit it on the head that having a full-time job and having meetings, it really gets in the way of having my midday nap or mid-afternoon snack, as much as that would be optimal.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes it's like you get home and you're, from your run, and you're just like, you barely have enough time to shower and get out the door. And, there's definitely things that you can do. There's like meal replacement stuff, and you can do shakes and all that kind of stuff. But again, that gets into the idea of like, you kind of have to be prepared. You have to have that ready to go. And you have to be ready for that. And it's just like another mental hurdle. But it's one of those things that can be a huge difference when it comes to being properly fueled and recovered for your workouts throughout the week, and not, so it's definitely something that I noticed myself. A lot of the biggest advances I made from my fitness, or just from progress in general, came from when I was focusing. I was more focused on my nutrition than normal, because nutrition plays a huge part in everything.
Yeah, and of course I'm being a little facetious with the midday nap, because I know that's not the reality for most of us, but just in general terms, what can runners do to take the stress and anxiety out of those decisions and make it as easy as possible to get good quality nutrition?
Yeah, so I think, to me, the biggest thing is planning. Two things. Well, I think for me it's two things. It's planning, and then having, like, not necessarily needing a lot of variety. And so maybe that's a personal thing, and it's not something I always love, I have to admit. But for me, and this goes back to planning, in the sense that if you don't need a lot of variety, you can pretty much plan to get the same stuff all the time. So like, I know when I go to the store, like, what I need for post-workout, pre-workout, during workouts, etc. And I know if I can, if I make a shake, I know exactly what I need to put in it. And I have the stuff at home. I can do it. Sometimes I can do it ahead of time. So that's a lot of it for me, is just being able to plan, and then not necessarily needing like all this variety, because that sometimes interrupts the planning. So for me, if I'm able to plan, it's a lot smoother, and it's a lot more consistent with being nailed on dialogue with nutrition.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of runners tend to be type A. I think it really lends itself to that type of person who's okay with that type of repetitiveness, because it is much easier if you're okay with routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think my advice to people is always to focus on one thing at a time. So I think a lot of times especially when it comes to nutrition, when we try to make changes, we try to change everything at once. So like, we look at ourselves and we say, okay, I'm not eating healthy. And that can mean a lot of different things for different people, but like, then we all of a sudden just try to change everything about our diet, right? And so we're like, okay, now I need to eat all this exotic salmon, and kind of go into these, just trying to change everything, really. And what I find is that if you just focus on one or two things at a time, so with running, if we're talking about this just purely from a performance perspective, it gets back to that pre-run and post-run. Those are the two most important things. And so first, if you're focused on those two things, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm fueling myself properly before my runs? And then what do I need to do to make sure that I'm fueling myself properly post runs? And just focus on those two things. Don't necessarily worry about like what your diet is the rest of the day, etc. Not that that's not important, but focus on those couple things. Get it down. Figure out what you like. Figure out what works for you. Figure out what's easy for you. And then once you develop that routine, and it becomes like just every day, a part of you every day, like you're not really thinking about it, then you can move on to the next thing. And so whatever that next thing is for you, if it's cutting down on desserts, if it's eating more nutritious meals at lunch, because you're at work and you're just always eating crap. Whatever it is, like take that, then that's the next step, right? And so you do focus on that until that becomes part of just your everyday, like the norm. And then you can take the next step. So don't try to do it all at once. Focus on one thing at a time. Start pre-workout, post-workout, and then move on from there.
I like it. Plain and simple. Figure out what works, change one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's what's always worked for me when I've wanted to change. Even like I'll fall off. There's definitely times where I'm less consistent with my nutrition, training, etc. And for me to get back on track, that's what I do. I just focus on one thing at a time, and it comes back quicker. In the sense that it's not my first time doing it. So sometimes it'll only take a week or two to get into a good rhythm, and then I'm able to kind of keep adding on from that. But for sure, don't feel like it's has to be on all the time. Sometimes you fall off, and just get back on the track.
Cool. All right. I think that's a good surface level response for how to get a little bit better at nutrition, at least. One other one I'm excited to get into is the idea of running through injuries. Talk about screwing up easy things. If it hurts to walk, you probably should not be running, and yet so many of us do it and even post about it on Strava. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely it's a real mental difficulty. There's I would say that it's almost like a mental health issue, and I don't say that in the sense to make mental health seem less important than it is, but I know personally that like I get depressed I would say not so much now because I'm not necessarily competing, but when I was competing, I would be depressed if I couldn't run, like literally depressed. And I would say that a majority of runners feel that way. Like, even if it's just for the day, it would just nag at me all day. Like, oh, I wasn't able to run today, et cetera, et cetera. And it's one of those things where even when you tell yourself, okay, not running today is not the end of the world. It's a small drop in the bucket of like their overall fitness, et cetera. There's still a mental state to it that I think we try to avoid at all costs. And that's why, even though we know to not push through an injury, even though we know that it's probably not going to get better by running through it, like we continue to push it because we just can't accept the mental struggle that we're going to go through if we don't run. Even though it ends up in the long run leading to a longer layoff and probably more mental struggle, I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's just difficult to get your head around mentally.
This podcast just got really deep. We started with the basic talk about making nutrition easy, and all of a sudden it's about really understanding yourself. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's what I've noticed with myself, and with elite or athletes that want to perform well. I always joke. It's funny. I was just joking about this with my father the other day. I watch NFL football, baseball, hockey. I love all the sports, and it's really funny when you see the athletes trying to come back from an injury, especially with like hockey and football, where it's like they're like, well, he broke his ankle and he's going to try to come back this week, and you're like, well, why don't you just take a week off? Like, big deal, you missed the game, it's whatever. And then my dad goes, yeah, but you're the guy that like rolled your ankle and then took 10 ibuprofen to try to run the next day, and I'm like, yeah, but, and so I think all of athletes are wired that way. Like, we just don't want to stop. And so as from the outside, from a coaching perspective, it's really easy to tell an athlete, hey, don't run today. It's better to take the day off, et cetera, et cetera. But from the inside, the athlete is always going to be wanting to push it, for sure.
Do you think part of it is those athletes in other sports influence us? I think one example that stands out to me is a Boston Bruins fan, and I know you are too, so you're probably familiar. But when they won the cup, Patrice Bergeron was playing with a punctured lung, and to me that was just the most awesome thing. But it doesn't really carry over as a runner. You probably should not be running with a punctured lung. So do you think there's any influence there?
I wouldn't say. I don't think. Well, maybe it is. Maybe for some people it is. Like they emulate elite athletes, whether from any sport. Maybe that's part of it. But I think it's more of an internal thing. I think I think athletes that, especially endurance athletes, that's just how we're wired. Like, we're drawn to the sport because that's part of how our mind works in general. So I think it's one of those things that I would say a lot of runners have, or that drive, whether they watch other sports or not.
Yeah. And this one sounds so simple, I almost feel silly asking this question, but what should you do to help yourself not run through injury?
Well, the simple answer is to get a coach. And obviously we offer coaching at Runners Connect, and this isn't meant to be promotional, but the biggest thing is to have somebody outside of yourself that can remind you about the actual science, the actual to remind you that taking one day off isn't going to kill you. All those little things, like to have that third person perspective is super, super helpful. Especially if it's somebody that you trust. It can be very, very helpful to have that person to lean on. And this gets back to that mental side too. Like, so first of all, you can have somebody that tells you, hey, this isn't the best idea to run today. It can kind of help you make that decision, because there are times where it's pretty obvious that you shouldn't be running. Like, there are times where you're just like, yeah, I just can't physically do it, right? And so that's a little bit easier to take those days off. But there are times where it's a difficult decision where you're just like, yeah, the pain was like a 4 to 5 out of 10, right? And it kind of stayed the same throughout the run. Like, that's a really difficult decision of like, okay, should I run tomorrow or not? And then, so that's where having that outside perspective and that third party can make a big difference, and being able to really look at it and say, yeah, this is where you're at in your training cycle. This is, this is what I think, et cetera, and get you outside of your own head. So that's one thing. And then the next thing too is just, like I talked about the mental side of things. It can be, if I didn't run for a day, I would think about it all day. And it can be really helpful if you have a coach, or even if it's a spouse or a training partner that can just talk to you, just every time you're feeling that way, you can say, hey, man, I'm really feeling bad that I didn't run today. And they can give you that, like, hey, look, you did, 55 miles last week. Like, you're totally going to be okay. Like, you've done all the work. Like, you're going to be totally, totally okay. And sometimes that can just be that reassuring voice that can help get you through that mental part of needing to take time off.
Yeah, and I think one thing I might personally add is not just having a coach, but building a really good relationship with your coach. To use an example with myself, I think when I was in high school, I got a stress fracture in my foot. And if a coach had asked me at the time, what's your pain level? I probably would have said, 4, 5 out of 10. It stings a little. And it's not even that I'd be lying to the coach. It's that I was probably lying to myself. So I think having a coach who knows you and who knows how to interpret your answers will allow you to have much better response.
Yeah, for sure. And, I'm talking about, I'm bringing my own personal experience into this. So like, I know as a coach and also as an athlete, but like, everybody's different. And so like, I've always been somebody that was going to push the limit and, push. But I've worked with a lot of athletes, and I've had a lot of teammates that didn't necessarily, not that they didn't have the drive, I don't want to say it that way, but like, they weren't quite as obsessive as me. And I say that as a positive to them and as a negative to me. And that my obsessiveness really was the cause of a lot of the struggles that I went through from training, and the reasons that I didn't necessarily perform probably to as well as I could have.
Yeah. And I'll move on to what I think is probably just as much a detriment to my training, which is the strength training piece you mentioned. This is really something that's hard for me, because I think as much as I've gotten into a routine, it's really something that I don't enjoy doing the way I enjoy running. And I think that's relatable to a lot of runners. As you said, we just love to run.
For sure. So the thing I would say to that is try to find ways to make it enjoyable, because it's not always, it is tough to mentally fight that every day or every week, to be like, oh man, I gotta do my strength training this week, et cetera, et cetera. Like, ideally you want it to be something that is at least somewhat enjoyable. And so it could be, there's a lot of different ways you can do things, but it could be in the sense of like, it could be your location. So like, maybe it could be going to the gym helps. It could be staying at home helps. It could be having dedicating a spot at home that helps. There's other things. It could be the types of routines. So like, yeah, generally we want to focus on specific areas, but there's not like, it's not like you have to do X, Y, and Z exercises. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can attack things. So it could be just the variety of exercises you try. It could be like even something as like gamifying your exercise. And so I noticed this with a lot of people that like try to get into running that have never run before. Like, they need to gamify it, and that's where like Strava and stuff like that has been hugely helpful, because they see the miles adding up, etc. So it could be like finding an app that allows you to gamify your strength training, earn points, or just keeps track, that kind of thing. If that's something that typically motivates you, that could be something like that. It could be music. So it could be like, or podcast, in the sense of like giving yourself playlist music or podcast that you want to listen to. So like your gym time is now the time that you get to enjoy podcasts, YouTube videos, music, etc., that you might not normally get to. And so you transition that, like, oh, I got to do my strength training, to like, oh, this is the time that I get to listen to my podcast. So those are just some of the things that I've personally seen athletes do that have helped a lot.
Yeah, I like that idea of gamification, in part because I think Strava has done that really successfully with running. You go out for a run and suddenly you have this pretty chart, you have your pace, you can see your heart rate and all kinds of other metrics, especially if you're a premium member. It's not as sexy to go post, hey, this is my 1 hour workout, and that's all that shows up. And I think in some small way that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so there are a lot of apps that are specific to strength training that do a lot of, in a way, similar to Strava, in the sense that like they'll track your reps, they'll track the weight that you used or the resistance that you used, etc. And so that could be a way. So like if that's what it is, so like it's a little bit different than Strava, but it's kind of similar in the sense that like you're changing your miles and your pace to like sets and reps, or sorry, to reps and resistance. And so that can be, and they can give you graphs and they can chart it and say, hey, last week you were able to do 7 reps with 55 pounds, something like that, or with the orange 55-pound band or something like that. And then this week you were able to do 8 reps. Like that can, like tracking like that can be a really good way to be able to see what you're doing. And then some of them even accumulate over time, like, oh, you've done 100 exercise, like 100 things, and so like you reach these milestones, etc. So everyone's a little bit different in terms of like what exactly is going to motivate them from a gamification perspective. But yeah, I would definitely give that a try. Something, there are a lot of apps, so like I can't recommend one off the top of my head, but definitely easy to Google like what some of interest could be.
For sure, yeah. And if I find any, I'll definitely try to link them in the show notes. But I want to get into maybe some ways that runners can help themselves to fit that in a little bit more. But I'll just add first from my own experience why I don't do that, which is really just it's one more thing to worry about when I'm already logging runs on Strava and then having to put them into the Excel sheet for my coach. It's just, it's that one extra step if you have another app.
Yeah, for sure. And that's so, like, I look at it as in like that would be a requirement of the app, is to make it easier, to make it automatic. There are some, and I don't know exactly how they work or like how expensive it is, but I do know there are some that like do it automatically. Like basically they like track your movement to the point where it's like basically recording all the data without you really having to enter anything. Again, I'm not exactly sure how it works or like what the cost is, but like if that is like the limiting factor or one of the reasons that's like really holding you back, then it's something you could certainly try.
Yeah. Okay. And I think another piece that's maybe related to strength work, and one reason why maybe people don't do it is the time piece. So I think there's kind of two sides to this. There's the genuinely being totally out of time, you're completely booked. But then I think there's the maybe more common side to it you brought up, which is the rationalization of not being able to do it, especially the elements of training that runners don't like as much. So why do you think this is something that you see so often in the athletes you work with?
I don't think this is necessarily unique to runners, in the sense that like if you look at like the fitness community overall, whether it be strength training, CrossFit, whatever it is, like or I would say this, you see a lot of people that are not runners that say the reason they don't go to the gym or the reason they don't exercise is they don't have time. It's not just running. Like sometimes people that aren't running at all say they don't have time for exercise. And so this is just one of those things that's just like your mind will always take the path of least resistance, right? And so for us, we love running, et cetera, et cetera. So getting out the door is not a mental hurdle for a lot of runners, like people that love to run. Going running is our therapy. It's what we love to do. Going to the gym, our mind is always going to create barriers to doing that. Our mind, it gets back to that evolutionary idea of like our mind is always going to like fight us to do nothing, to basically just eat, sleep, and like survive. And so anything outside of those things, our mind is going to fight us. And so I think we get this, our mind develops this perception of like, oh, I just don't have the time. But like I said, you can do a really quality strength training in 15, 20 minutes, depending on how long you want to get in there. But when you really think about that, that's not a lot of time. I would say, and there are certainly people or days or times where legitimately don't have 20 minutes. I get that. But I would say that that's for most people, that's not a consistent thing where you can't find 20 minutes throughout the day. Like I said, for me, I noticed, I started realizing that like when my son was bathing, like I wasn't really doing much. And I was like, oh, this is actually a really good time where I can do my strength training. And so that's when I started to do my strength training. Another thing that I started to do as well, and again, this is all dependent on families, but like my 5-year-old loves to go to the gym now. And so we're lucky we live in a community with a little gym. So he's always like, I pick him up from school and he wants to go to the gym. He's 5. I mean, he doesn't really do much. He kind of walks on a treadmill, but he loves to go. So for me, that's really great because I get to go. And yeah, every once in a while I have to make sure that he doesn't fall off the back of the treadmill. But like for me, it's been a huge boon to being able for getting me to go to the gym. So maybe it's one of those things where it's like you can combine it with other things. So if you have a family, you can take your family and say, hey, today, 3 days a week, we're going to spend 20 minutes in the gym together. And we're all going to do this routine together, kind of thing. Yeah, I know I see a lot of these on like either TikTok, Instagram, whatever, these reels of like families doing exercise together. And I know it sometimes seems a little corny to see that, but like it really can be a good way to get that in. So I think a lot of it comes down to being creative and then realizing that you're going to have to fight your mind. Your mind is always going to come up with excuses. I'm tired. I don't have time. I'm hungry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And realizing that that's part of like fighting that mental barrier is part of like getting it in. Like to me, that's I guess maybe that's my outlook on things. Like fighting that mental barrier is just one of those ways that we try to continue to grow and develop and be better people. Is fighting that mental struggle.
All right, Jeff, I don't have kids, so I'm going to defer to you on this one. But is it really that simple if you have little kids to just bring them with you to the gym?
In my experience, so every kid is different. Like based on like I have 4, and every kid is very different. But all of mine have wanted to spend time with me or their mom, and so sometimes it's not about what you're doing. So I'll say this too: my kid, the youngest, is the one that goes to the gym with me, and he's only 5. The other ones really couldn't care, but they're older, so they can be home alone. So, but yeah, so like to me, once 5, 6, 7 years old, like they want to be with you, and they will do those. And they will copy you. So for those that have kids, like they copy everything that you do. And so if you're somebody that goes consistently to the gym or goes consistently running, your kids are going to do that too. Like it's just kind of one of those things that's like natural. And it's one of those things I'm getting a little personal now, but like it makes you proud, right? Because I love to run, I love to exercise, I like to go to the gym. And so to see your children also like those things, or at least take interest in them, is really cool.
That's awesome. And hopefully instilling good habits in them so they don't run through injury and miss out on strength training and all the other things.
Yeah, and I'll say like this, I'm talking about my youngest here. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and getting her out of her room is like the hardest thing in the world. So you go through phases.
You have to take the small wins, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'm going to go back to what was going to be the original topic for all of this podcast, which is recovery runs. Again, another one that sounds so simple, just keep it slow, keep it recovery paced. So difficult. Why is that?
A lot of reasons. So like you said, kind of the stratification of things certainly makes it more difficult because we're always super, super aware of like what our pace is. And no matter how much somebody tells you that, this is your optimal pace is within this range, et cetera, and that optimal pace range is slow, like it still feels good to go faster. Like I know it, I coach, I do it, et cetera. And then when I run faster than I should, I think, wow, I felt great today. That's awesome. And so, there's just that mental side of things that like makes it super, super difficult. I think a lot of runners are just hardwired that anything that we do that is more effort or a greater intensity, greater pace, et cetera, is better. And so that's something that's like super hard to get out of our systems. And then you tack in social pressure, whether it be Strava, whether it be running groups, etc. Just adds fuel to the fire of how difficult that can be.
Yeah, and how much of the time do you think runners label something literally on Strava or just in their mind as a recovery run and go too fast, versus maybe thinking of it as a workout when really they should be taking a recovery run? And I'll give you an example of where my head's at. Is I think a lot of runners tend to naturally kind of pick up the pace. Maybe they'll start slow and get quicker, and then that kind of just becomes, hey, this was a progression run. It is kind of a way to label it so that it was never intended to be an easy run in the first place, even if maybe that's what was on the training plan.
Yeah, that's a great thing. That's a great question, and a great. I think for me, what I always try to tell athletes is that every single run that you do has a purpose, right? And so the recovery runs, as though they may seem like the most inconsequential part of your training plan, are very important. And their purpose is to help you recover. And they do that because the way the body recovers is by delivering, is through the blood. So blood delivers nutrients and it helps the muscles repair. So the more blood you can get into the muscles, the faster they theoretically can repair themselves and get back and help you recover, get back to training harder the next day, etc. So when we think about getting blood into the legs, the best way to do that, or one of the easiest ways to do that, is to run, because it serves two things. One, it helps you move your legs, and two, it does provide an aerobic stimulus that does help you progress from a long-term perspective. So when we think about that, when we look at our training schedule and it says recovery run, like what always helped me is to think, okay, today's purpose is to recover. The more I can execute that and recover, and the better that's going to be for me in the long term. Running faster does not necessarily help me execute this recovery session better. And so that always helped me, at least from the start of things, like execute recovery runs better, and to realize that these are an important part of the training plan. They have a purpose. They're not just there as like junk miles or like to put in miles. That's how I've always looked at it, and that's what I tell athletes, and that seems to be what works best.
And beyond the speed, is there any other element of a recovery run that you think runners can screw up? And
yeah,
I think
so the
the
distance for sure. So like this is a problem of mine for sure. I was always a high volume runner, and I would get caught up in the weekly volume totals, in the daily volume totals, and that would take recovery runs from being purely recovery runs, regardless of the pace, to being something that added fatigue. And so that gets a little trickier in marathon training, because you do want to have some semblance of fatigue in there. But that can be the way to screw up recovery, is that there's not necessarily a hard line, but there's definitely a point of diminishing returns, from the sense of like, okay, and this is going to be completely dependent on what your volume is, like your overall volume, what you can handle. But all of us, if you're running consistently and you're training hard, will have a certain amount of miles that you can do that, for lack of a better way to say it, is basically effortless, right? And that, to me, is like your recovery distance. Because as long as you run it easy enough, there's really no big effort, and that's actually promoting recovery. Then there's a slow shift of like, okay, you add another mile, and it's like, okay, now it's become, there's effort's increasing. It's not just, there's no effort. And then you add another mile, and it's like, there's a little bit of fatigue being in there. And then you add another mile. So like, there's a spectrum there. And once you start getting into that spectrum is when I think you stop becoming recovery runs and start becoming some type of fatigue building exercise.
Is it truly just based on feel and effort? Like, say you're a 35, 40 mile a week marathoner, and you go out and run 15 miles, but it feels completely effortless. Can that be labeled as a recovery run?
I would hesitate to say no, because I think from a physiological perspective, it's just not, like, even though you felt good, and even even if you kept it easy, like, there's still fatigue that's being built up, that even if you don't realize it in the moment, it's going to impact your workouts down the line. I think that's the hardest thing about injuries, running injuries in general, or recovery runs, etc., is that like it doesn't just happen with a snap. So it's not like, okay, my recovery day today was 4 miles and I had to do it at 10 minutes per mile, whatever. And then you run 4.01 miles, and then if you did that, you get hurt, right? Like that, in a way, that would be good, because like then we just like, okay, 4 miles, stop, never get hurt, etc. Or whatever your pace. Okay, now I ran 9 minutes per mile, and then the next day you're hurt. Like that's not how it happens. Like that fatigue builds up over time, and it accumulates day by day by day, week by week by week, and then that's what leads to overuse injuries, leads to being over fatigued during a specific workout, and then biomechanics changing, etc. And so, so I would say that in that case, I don't think that can be a recovery run. That's just my personal opinion on it.
And if runners want to make sure that they get the recovery run right, you just brought up there's kind of a gray zone between feel, but also physiologically you can still feel good and step over that line. So how do runners make sure that their recovery runs are serving the right purpose?
Yeah, so I mean, you can definitely do. So there are definitely calculations or formulas that you can do to get your pace perspective. And then, so what I suggest runners do is, we have a calculator and we can link it up in the show notes of like what your recovery pace should be. So I start with that. Like, okay, that's the general range. And then what I tell athletes to do is then take that range and then go by feel. So start out on the slower range. If things feel good, you can pick it up all the way up to the faster range. If things don't feel good, either cut the run short. It's totally fine to run slower, but use that. So use that as the speed limit, really, and then let your body decide where in that limit or where in that range fits you best for that day.
All right, I like it. So we touched on finding a calculator for pace. Finding a little bit what's gonna fit on the day, what makes the most sense. I think one more piece that maybe comes into it is where those recovery runs fit in your week, or even the route you're going to take. Should it be hilly or flat, stuff like that? Does any of that matter? Can you screw that stuff up?
Yeah, I would definitely say you can screw that up. I mean, ideally, you may be dealing with limitations that are outside your control. Like if you just live in a really hilly area and you can't get anywhere that's flat, you kind of just have to do what you can do. But like generally speaking, if you can keep things on a flat, softer surface, that's going to be better for recovery. Because hills, you can certainly go up them and down them slow enough or cautiously enough that you're not inducing any additional fatigue, etc. But then that becomes another variable, right? That just means something you have to like kind of consciously think about. Like, okay, I'm going up the hill, make sure that I slow my pace down, make sure I take it easy, etc. And even that, like up and down hills are still going to create, some type of additional require some type of additional effort that just running on flat ground doesn't. So ideally, your runs are as comfortable as possible, but logistically, we know that's not always the case. We get into this a lot with the summer because heat is something that impacts our recovery. Our body spends energy and time trying to cool ourselves down, both during the run itself and then during the day. So that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you really can't do it if you live in a hot part of the country and you just have to run in the heat. That's just one of those things that you have to like realize. But yeah, those things can make play factors.
Yeah, and I think it really does, nail down the importance of really knowing your effort level, because really you can plug it into that calculator, but that's going to assume, I'm guessing, that you're heading out on a nice 50, 60 degree day on flat terrain. It's probably not accounting for if you're going up a 5% gradient hill in the middle of 100 degrees midsummer.
Right, exactly. And stressed. And so, there's so many factors that can play into like how you feel during a workout. So did you drink a lot of caffeine? Are you properly fueled? Are you stressed at work? All that kind of stuff. Did you play with your kids all day? That kind of stuff.
Awesome. All right. So Jeff, I am kind of playfully going to label this podcast, Don't Screw Up the Easy Stuff. Yet even after we've gone through all of these topics, I'm probably still going to screw stuff up on this list. I'm sure a lot of people listening are. So what's the high level takeaway to at least, get a little bit better?
Yeah, so the high level takeaway. So I would say this. So it's not necessarily a takeaway, but here's how I approach it. Like, look at it like this: you don't consistency beats perfection. So you don't have to do everything perfect every day all the time. But as long as you're trying to put in the effort every day to be consistent, and so if 5 out of 7 days of the week or 6 out of the 7 days of the week you have a good routine and you follow things appropriately, then things are going to work out. You're going to be in a good situation. So that's how I try to look at it. I think in the sense of just try to focus on the consistency, the overall big picture, not necessarily like one specific day, like that being the be all end all.
Awesome. Focus on the big picture. I like it. I feel like we really got like into minutia with all these very specific things that runners screw up, and then really it all comes back to, do the best you can. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think anytime, so for me, like, I hope that anybody that's listening to this, they're able to find one or two takeaways that helps them. And I know that's for me, like when I listen to podcasts, etc. Like I'm always trying to just get one or two nuggets that I can apply to myself. And so hopefully some of the advice and some of the anecdotal evidence that I provided gives you some good tips that can help you stay consistent with all of the things that should be simple but aren't always easy.
Yeah, and I think my biggest takeaway maybe from today, and honestly, I can't even remember which topic we brought it up related to, but it's make it easier on yourself. I think maybe that was related to nutrition, but I think it applies to a lot of aspects of running.
For sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Jeff, I think that was super helpful. Hopefully inspiring me to do a little bit of the strength work, making sure that I'm doing my recovery runs right and all those other stuff. I appreciate you coming on and joining the show today.
Oh, so happy, and hope everybody enjoyed listening. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeff.